Hi, so today I want to share with you the number one behavioral tool for overcoming anxiety. And I'm going to share a experience that I had recently that is, yes, related to this arm sling. And I also want to share at the end of this video how some different psychotherapies work with this behavioral technique because I think it could be a good resource for you to understand that, but also I think it helps to elucidate why this is so important. So, I want to start by saying that there are many types of anxiety, and what's best for recovery from each one can vary, but this tool applies to a lot of them. So, let me start with this recent experience that I had. And I'm going to back up in time because some of you know that I moved my entire business online prior to the pandemic because I wanted to be able to travel and work at the same time. So, this trip that I'm on right now has been years in the making because obviously, right after I started my business, the pandemic hit, travel was very limited. So, this month was finally the fruition of a couple of years of planning to spend a month out in the Rockies skiing and working. And what happens? On day 4 of my trip, I dislocated my shoulder. And the way that it happened, I wasn't even skiing. I was walking in the little town that we were in, which was covered in ice, but I was walking on a part where they had put dirt on top of it. I was going super carefully, really watching my steps, and my feet flew out from under me unbelievably. The velocity with which I hit the ground was enormous. It all went on my shoulder, which maybe is a good thing because it wasn't my head, and I couldn't get up. I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. So somebody stopped to help me. She was very sweet. She wanted to help me get up. I was like, I'm not ready yet. I laid there for quite a while, and then finally I kind of struggled to a sitting position. And then she was trying to help me stand up, and I literally could not move the right side of my body. Couldn't move it. Intense pain and like no ability. Like it didn't even matter like if I was willing to let the pain get worse, I could move it. No, I could not move it. So we dialed 911. The fire truck and EMS came. They actually couldn't even get the stretcher to me because I was on so much ice. It took 3 guys to get me up. It's really pretty horrible. And then I was in an ambulance for the first time in my life, and then the emergency room, and then about 4 hours of waiting before they could reset my arm. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life. And then after they reset the arm, it's about 4 to 6 weeks of recovery, 2 weeks in a sling the entire time. No skiing for me. A lot of discomfort, really. Oof, a lot of discomfort. But I'll be okay, right? So I also want to say with regard to this experience, like I understand people go through way worse things, but I'm just using this as a small example to help you understand the behavioral intervention that I'm going to talk about. So I went home and I rested for a couple days, and then I really wanted to get outside. So obviously I'm really disappointed. The whole trip is blown. We're deciding, do we just go home? Do we stay out here? I knew I didn't want to just go home. I knew I kind of wanted to stay out and just experience the area, even if I'm not able to ski. Do I like it? Do I not like it? But I really did. Part of me really wanted to get outside, and another part of me was like, no, 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 don't go out there. There's tons of ice, which there was, snowy all over, icy all over, and movement kind of hurts. But on the other hand, I was like, this is good for you. So I'm kind of lucky that I grew up with horses, actually, not like fancy stable kind of stuff, but just kind of like a pony in the backyard. And the whole rule was when you get kicked and thrown off, and we had one pony where I would get thrown off all the time, you get right back on. Get back on the horse. So you've heard that expression, get back on the horse. And I have to say, there is so much truth in that. So, as I said, I was thinking about you guys. I was, itching to get outside a little bit for a little bit of a hike. And I was like, I got to do it. I got to start soon. I got to go now. So we went out for a hike. My first hike, I was very tentative. I had on micro spikes. My husband was with me. I used a pole, the whole thing. I have to be careful because the other risk with a shoulder dislocation is that you fall or bump it, or even just if you extend your arm, that's not the hurt one. If you extend your arm too much, the whole thing can get dislocated again, and then possibility of surgery and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you really don't want to get re-hurt. I took reasonable precautions. I went for a hike. And I have to say, I almost cried from happiness. So I'm going to show you a couple of flashes here. And then the next day we did another hike. And then the day after that we did another hike. And they were short, an hour and a half. But I knew I had to do it. And then today is my first day in a city where I'm going to be going about my business by myself with this arm. And I have a little trepidation, but I have to do it. So how can this apply to you? The number one behavioral intervention for getting over many anxieties is not avoiding. Do not avoid. So unfortunately, if you're in a car crash, one of the best things you can do is to keep driving. And this is because our procedural memory is so strong, but our sort of trauma memory, and obviously what I experienced, very little T trauma. But even with that, our brain wants to broaden out the trauma, right? So my brain wanted to tell me it's dangerous to walk anywhere, in any manner, at any point. And my brain wants to forget the fact that I've lived on this earth many, many, many decades and I've never dislocated my shoulder before. So all of the procedural memory experience I have can get overridden by intense pain and intense fear. And it makes sense. It makes sense for us to pause after a car accident or a physical accident like I had, or another kind of trauma. Pause and see, what do we learn? What do we have to do to keep ourselves safe, but not to make it pervasive. So when I said earlier that there's many types of anxiety and how this tool applies can really vary by what type of anxiety is, I'm going to give you just a couple of examples here. So let's start with agoraphobia. If you have agoraphobia and you can't leave your house, the only way you'll truly get over that eventually is to leave your house. Now, I'll use the different therapy techniques I wanted to mention to elucidate how this might work in that case. And then for all of you viewers, you can sort of extrapolate this to your own situation. But one of the most effective therapy techniques for agoraphobia and other phobias is exposure relapse prevention, ERP. Now, the biggest problem with ERP is that there's sort of a 50% dropout rate because it's about exposure. So the therapist will work with you on exposing yourself to the phobia that you're having, whether that's a spider or an elevator or leaving your home. And that can be extremely anxiety provoking for people. So that makes a high dropout rate. But if you stick with it, it has enormous, enormous success. So another therapy technique, which is EMDR, and I have a bunch of EMDR videos. EMDR is kind of a mini exposure because you imagine the exposure with the therapist in the office using, say, a light bar or tappers, the bilateral stimulation brain piece is very important in EMDR, but you're imagining going through it. And while you're imagining that, you're feeling an awful lot of that anxiety. So you get to desensitize yourself in the office first. Now, let me back up and just say ERP also does this. They have you imagine it. They go through a handful of steps before you're actually required to do it. And the same thing with cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy will focus on talking through how to get you to do the things that you're avoiding. I've found EMDR really super effective for phobias, panic attacks, agoraphobia, a lot of things, because it's really an embodied experience within a safe place with the therapist. So just to pause here for a second, because I no longer do psychotherapy. I get that question a lot. I have become an affiliate of two services because I have a worldwide audience and people are always looking for services. One of them is called Virtual EMDR. And for something like I went through, this fall, if you have not had like a huge number of traumas in your life, I think Virtual EMDR would be a great fit to process this. With very complex trauma, probably not the greatest idea, but it's an online service that allows you to do unlimited sessions. I do have a link below and a coupon code for a discount, and I'm an affiliate, get an affiliate commission which supports this channel, just to give you a heads up. And then I'm also an affiliate of BetterHelp, which provides psychotherapy around the globe in 40 different languages, maybe more by now. And there's also a link for you for that below. But those therapy techniques can be super helpful for that type of phobia, agoraphobia, panic attack. So let's take obsessive compulsive disorder, which is an anxiety disorder where people have an obsessive thought about something and then a compulsive activity. That compulsive activity actually lowers their anxiety temporarily, which over time will form a cycle in the brain where people tie that compulsive activity to a mini relief in their anxiety, and therefore that becomes very addictive or compulsive, you could say. So with OCD, the behavioral interventions are actually not to engage in the compulsive behavior. So we'll take a simple example of somebody who washes their hands because they worry about disease all the time. And it becomes so bad that their hands get chapped and raw, and maybe it takes them forever to leave the house, or they can't get any work done, right? It can get very, very severe. So the behavioral intervention is actually going to be to not wash the hands, because that's the piece that's giving you a relief. So that might sound a little bit like the opposite of not avoiding, but what it is it's not avoiding the anxiety. So the anxiety or the fear that is generating that OCD cycle has to be addressed. It can't be addressed if you continue in the compulsive manner. So most OCD treatment will include a component of behavioral change, which will be not engaging in the compulsive behavior. And then I just want to briefly touch on trauma, because I can't cover this totally in this video. But with trauma, particularly if you have experienced trauma from another human, I'm not saying to put yourself with that other human. I'm not telling you to put yourself in dangerous way at all. But the problem with trauma is that if we are traumatized by somebody, that can become pervasive, and we can become avoidant of all people who are similar in any way. Or the trauma could be linked to a place or an event, and then again, it gets very generalized. That's what trauma brain does for us. And to not let it get generalized, to keep it specific and keep yourself safe within that, but don't generalize it to everything. So I'm hoping this has been helpful for you. Again, I do think that psychotherapy techniques can be hugely helpful on these issues. And if you're addressing this in a self-help way, just remember, behavioral interventions are really what talk to the old brain, which is where our procedural memory is, which is where our habits form, and it drives a lot of our behavior. It totally can override what your frontal lobe is telling you. Your frontal lobe might be saying, it's safe, I know it is, or I have to do this, or I have to get out of the house, or whatever the frontal lobe is saying, which is very logical. This part of the brain can be like, and the only way to change that part of the brain is actually behavioral. And I do include in behavioral interventions breathing techniques, that's behavioral, exercise, a whole lot of other things. Many of you have watched my cognitive behavioral therapy exercises video, but it talks a lot about behavioral interventions. And I'm not saying that they are the only approach or the only thing, but they are critically important. So thanks for joining me today. Thanks for listening to my story about my failed trip, which hopefully is not actually failed, because I'm doing some different things. Went to a museum I wouldn't have gone to otherwise. Drove through a part of the country I'd never driven through before. Saw elk on the side of the road. So definitely staying out here, not retreating back home after this accident, has enriched my life. Getting out of the house and going on those hikes enriched my life. So I'm hoping this video enriches your life. And please comment below. Let me know what you think. If you have an idea for a future video, please share it. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe. It's very motivating for me. And if you like this video, please do give it a like. Alrighty, I will see you guys soon. Bye.